Okay, it's time to get started again with our next video. So today I want to talk about how to share your faith. How to share your faith. If any of the videos that I do, this is I'm most passionate about, because this is what I love to train people on. This is what God's gifted me for, and I really believe in this. And so I hope it will help you with how you share your faith in the future. Now, Rick Warren, who wrote The Purpose-Driven Church and The Purpose-Driven Life, and you hear Pastor Chris talk about him a lot. I got to go to one of his conferences years ago out in California. And he said, you can't win your enemies to Christ. You can only win your friends. Man, that is a powerful statement if you think about it. We're not out trying to win enemies. We're winning people that we want to make our friends. And when you start trying to build relationships to make friendships, then because you're friends with people, then you're going to want to tell them about the greatest thing in your life, and that is your relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, I went to seminary out in Fort Worth, Texas, and my seminary professor that was one of my favorite was a man named Dr. Roy Fish. And Dr. Roy Fish was he was just powerful. He wasn't even a powerful speaker so much, but his words were so powerful, and I loved to hear him talk. And I had the opportunity to be able to drive him around when he came to speak at our church in Atlanta, and just got to gain some wisdom from him. But here's what he said. He said it takes the average person 7 times to hear the gospel before they accept Christ. Now, 7 times. 7 times, he said. And here's the question he would ask next. He said, are you willing to be number 6? Wow, that's really deep when you think about that. So maybe you're the one that leads people up to the next person to accept Christ, but are you willing to be obedient, to be able to keep sharing your faith so that the next person maybe accepts Christ? Or maybe you're number 1 on the list, or maybe you're number 5 on the list. You may be number 7, but are you willing to be number 6? Now, I know a lot of you like The Office, and this is not a quote from The Office. This is actually from the greatest hockey player ever, Wayne Gretzky, and I love what he says. He says, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Now, let's take that in evangelism then. You miss 100% of the opportunities to share the gospel when you don't share the gospel. So that's why it's so important for us to share our faith. So I'm going to talk to you today about how we can be intentional in sharing Jesus with people, how to be intentional to share our faith. Now, here's the thing we have to remember. We don't save anyone. I want to, again, when you come out of this class, remember that you don't save anyone. I've had people say, well, Pastor Kevin, Dr. Bussey, whatever, he saved somebody. I haven't saved anyone. I've never saved anyone in my entire life. I am not capable of doing that. So I don't save anyone. But our job is to share. Our job is to share. And I love what it says in Matthew. If I can get there we go. In Matthew chapter 28, a verse that you're probably, 3 verses, that you're probably very familiar with. And Jesus said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I'm commanded, and surely I'm with you until the very end of the age. So our job is not to make converts. Our job is to make disciples. So we go out to lead people to Christ, and then we want them to, of course, continue to grow in their faith, as we say here at Highlands, to find their next steps. So we don't save anyone. Our job's to share. It is the Holy Spirit's job to bring people to Jesus. And when I finally realized that years ago, it took all the pressure off of me trying to share my faith. It's amazing. So, how can we be intentional about sharing our faith? First thing to know is that we have to pray. Ask God every day to give you Holy Spirit encounters. The Holy Spirit goes ahead of us before we share the gospel. Pray every single day for lost people. Go to Saturday prayer, and if your church, when you leave here and doesn't have Saturday prayer, or whatever, whenever they have prayer, make sure that you are praying with people. Ask for eyes to see and ears to hear. Now, we have this card that we do at Highlands that has the list of people. Those are my list of people that I pray for every single day. I pray for them. Clint, Travis, Kenny, Robbie, Tyler, Houston, Devin, Ben, Taylor, Drew, Pete, Ethan, Miranda, and then I pray for a guy named Sean from the Cheesecake Factory. A few years ago, Miss Cass and I were at the Cheesecake Factory just eating. And if you know the Cheesecake Factory, you're all kind of crammed in there, and this guy, all of a sudden, who's waiting on us, just starts pouring out his heart to us. And I look over, Miss Cass got this little smirk on her face because she always knows it just seems to happen to me. And I'm thinking, what did I do? I didn't even share with him. Anyway, I got to share with him a little bit of the gospel, but I mean, it wasn't the right place to do that. And one of our Highlands College students was one of the waiters, and I made sure that they connected. And so I've been praying for Sean, even though I have no idea whether he's going to get saved or not. The first guy named Clint was from one of the companies that I chaplained, who I no longer chaplain anymore, but I know that God is the person, God, the Holy Spirit is the one that's going to lead him to Christ. It has nothing to do with me. So we pray is the first thing that we must do. Then we want to build relationships with those whom we are serving. Now, whether this is on a first Saturday serve, or whether it's somebody you work with, whatever it is, you want to build relationships. And remember what Rick Warren said again, you can only win your friends to Christ, not your enemies. So people can sense your motives. They can sense your motives. You want to be able to find common ground with people. Let's say you're not really a computer person. Well, but then ask about someone that likes computers, or maybe they like cars. Ask them about cars, or if they like, dancing, they're into ballet or whatever kind of line dance. Ask them about whatever it is. You find common ground. Now, you don't want to sympathize with people, but you want to empathize with whatever they're going through. So you empathize with them, and then you listen for open doors to share Jesus. And when you're praying every day for eyes to see and ears to hear, those doors are going to open. And then we want to ask them how we can pray for them. Now, I don't want you to underestimate this. You want to pray for everything that people that ask for prayer for. I was on chaplain rounds years ago, and a guy, they build drawbridges in this company, and he was welding, and he said, "Can you pray for my weld?" And I kind of thought to myself, that's kind of crazy to pray for a weld. But the thing is and this is good for us to know that go on bridges, they get x-rayed by the Department of Transportation, and if it's not a perfect weld, then he could lose his job. So I prayed for his weld, and then the next week he told me about how the fact that his weld went well, and that he still had his job. So you pray for whatever one of people to pray for, except unless it's illegal, obviously. And then you want to trust the Holy Spirit to work. Now, you must realize that this may be as far as you get. That's okay. Remember, it's not up to you to lead people to Christ. It's up to the Holy Spirit. It's just your job to share. And then you want to check for their spiritual condition. So here's some questions you might ask. Hey, where do you attend church? If they say, First Baptist, First Methodist, First Presbyterian, First Assembly of God, whatever it might be, then you might even ask them, hey, well, who's the pastor? What's the pastor's name there? And if they don't know the pastor's name, then they probably haven't been there very much. But you want to hear that, and you're going to be banking all this in the back of your mind. And just because someone goes to church does not mean they have a relationship with Jesus. Now, if they do, tell them to tell you a little about their church. And then the next thing you want to do is ask the eternal question. And this is one if you go with me, you'll hear me use this often. Do you know for certain that you'll go to heaven when you die? Or do you know where you're going to spend eternity when you die? I mean, all kinds of different ways to ask that question. Now, some will say yes, because I've asked Jesus in my life. Now, I don't get people resaved. I mean, the reality is either they're saved or they're not. Some may say, I think so. Some may say, I go to church. Some may say, I'm a good person. If someone says, I think so, I'll stop and say, hey, wouldn't you like to know for certain? And then some will say, well, I go to church. And I'll say, well, that's all well and good, but, just going to church doesn't make you a Christian any more than me. Going to the gym makes me somebody that's really strong. I mean, there's more to it than that. Or if they say I'm a good person, they say, well, I'd like to think that I'm a good person, but I'm not nobody's really good. I mean, we all sin. And then if they say no, then you kind of know where they're at. So those are some good questions to ask. Now then, what the next thing to do is I ask for permission to have them know for certain. So if they say, well, I think so, I said, well, wouldn't you like to know for certain? Or if they say, well, I go to church, and I say, well, can I share with you, how you can know for certain? Because just going to church isn't good enough, or none of that's good enough. You just ask for permission. Now, if someone does not give you permission, then you stop. Remember, it's the Holy Spirit's job to lead people to Christ. Our job is just to share. But most of the time when you get permission, then you're able to do that. So when you do it, there are different ways of sharing the gospel. One of the ways, and I'm going to teach you this one later on, is one called the Roman Road. Now, I think I made a reference to that in one of the previous videos, but it's just Romans 3:23, Romans 6:23, Romans 5:8, Romans 10:9 and 10, and Romans 10:13. Again, I'm going to explain to you how you can use the Roman Road in our next class. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail here, but that's a great way to use it. Also, the bridge illustration, which I'm going to share with you. And so then you ask for permission, again, to do that. So I never use a track. I'm not saying that tracks are bad, but they're okay, but I don't like to be looking like I'm trying to sell something. If I ever have a track, which is very rare, I would give it to them after I shared with them so that they could read it on their own. Then sometimes you'll realize that people are ready. So if they are, then you just lead them through a simple prayer to accept Christ. But then sometimes you're going to find out, hey, they're not ready. So when they're not ready, then I back off. Because again, I realize that it's the Holy Spirit's job to lead people to Christ, not me. And when you do that, it frees you up so much. So then you want to do is you want to get follow-up, whether it's, whether you use a connection card, text 74,000, whatever it might be, you just need to have some sort of follow-up, because we want to do that. You may take your phone in the notes section or pad, write down the number. If someone has a smartphone, right there where I'm with them, I'll have them pull out their smartphone and I'll download the Bible app with their permission. And just tell them, that's a way that you can do it. So there's different ways of doing that, but you just want to make sure that you connect with people. So some of you are going to be able to go with me on some outreaches. These are some pictures of some people that I've just recently had to be able to share the gospel. This was a Vietnam veteran who I led to Christ there at the Dream Center just a few months ago. This is some of your fellow students going out, and there's David Girk, who's I kind of call my partner in crime. We loved going and sharing our faith together. Here's another one, young lady that we led to Christ on one of our Saturday serves. This man prayed to receive Christ with one of your fellow students there. That was awesome. And then this was a guy, I can't make this story up. We're done sharing, and this guy walks up to me and just says, hey, can you pray for me? I'm like looking, and David Girk, who I showed you in the picture before, is the one that took this picture because he knew what was about to happen. I think what happens is when you share your faith, God gives you favor and starts sending you other people. Now, again, when we get to class, we're going to discuss more about this and talk about how you can share your faith, but I can't emphasize enough how much this is important. And even though I don't have the gift of mercy, I'm still supposed to show mercy. And I realize not all of you have the gift of evangelism, but we're all supposed to share our faith. So I look forward for us discussing this in class. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.